I'm living in a local area where there's going to be a substation that's set to be built, or what would you say to me?
I suppose in terms of just thinking about that first part of the question, why do we need to do this? Essentially, if we're going to hit some of the net zero goals, whether it's 50 gigawatts by 2050 or 45 gigawatts by 2040, essentially the infrastructure that we have today, those pylons, those cables, those substations, they're not really fit for purpose. They were designed for an era where we didn't have the amount of renewable generation we have today. So they all need to be replaced. And it's a mass replacement. It's not just the old substation here or the old overhead line with the associated pylons. It's actually, we need brand new overhead lines to work alongside the existing. We need to step up the voltages. We need brand new substations where we've never considered having them before. And that is to get us to those net zero goals. So it's a huge, as you mentioned, it's a huge effort across the UK grid system. It's not in one local community. It's all over the UK that we need to look at how we're going to transform the grid system. And that obviously needs to be coordinated. And that's National Grid's job to try and coordinate that using the transmission owners, the 3 UK transmission owners, to help them undertake that and actually place those transmission owner substations around the grid system. And that's essentially where the developers then connect into. And now, because we are starting to move the grid offshore, that could be an offshore substation as well as an onshore substation like the ones that TWP will connect to. In terms of those local communities, one of the things that we really need to do is explain to them what a substation is, what it could look like, the size, the substation. Will it be noisy in terms of the equipment that we're going to have in there? Could we do anything innovative to actually make it useful to the community? And those are the kind of conversations we need to have. Why does it need to be there as opposed to being somewhere else? Why is it that's the right place to have it? So we need to there talk about, the coordinated approach, the National Grid, is actually, what they're trying to achieve and why it's best to have certain substations in certain areas. To be honest, we need to understand from the community, what do they want? By doing this, what could we actually do for them? So for me, a big part of this engagement that we need to have with communities is actually listening to them. Having a kind of major infrastructure build in their community, can be scary in terms of what it's going to leave, in terms of that lasting effect. But can we do something that could actually make it positive? We could use that space to build something that's useful to the community. It could be additional play parks. It could be actually using the substation itself. EV charging is another example. But again, it's that engagement to work out what really would be useful.
Hannah, I'm going to come to you next on consent. But before I do, is there anything that you would add to that? What would you say to me as somebody in a community where a substation is set to be built?
I think, as Jean says, it's really important to set the context of why these developments are happening, and also to make it kind of clear to communities how that relates back to them in their day-to-day lives. We're all aware of kind of net zero, and we hear climate change and the significance of these things that are going on in the world around us, but that doesn't necessarily translate to the local community and, when they're faced with these potential infrastructure developments in their areas. But it's trying to relate back that kind of how they live their lives and why this kind of infrastructure is necessary. And as Jean says, through our consent process, we have to consider, what the impacts are going to be, but we have to think about opportunities to enhance the local community, but also to mitigate any impacts that we may have, to come about with the best design solution that we can that's kind of fit for purpose in terms of what's needed, but also cognizant of kind of this community environment that we're placing ourselves into.